This is one of those cases. On a summer night in 1999, two best friends climbed into a car and drove away from everything they knew. They were young, they were laughing, they had no reason to be afraid. One of them had just turned 17. It was supposed to be a birthday worth remembering, and it was. Just not in any of the ways it should have been. By the following morning, both girls were dead. A killer had already disappeared back into the community, and a tiny vial of biological evidence collected from the crime scene would sit quietly in a laboratory for the next 20 years, waiting for science to catch up with justice. When it finally did, the name that emerged didn't belong to a stranger. It belonged to someone the town already knew. To understand what this case meant to the people it touched, you have to understand the place where it happened. Dothan, Alabama sits in the southeastern corner of the state, wedged into the angle where Alabama borders both Florida and Georgia. The locals call this stretch of territory the Wiregrass region, named after the native grass that used to dominate the landscape before farmers cleared it for peanuts and cotton. It's a part of the country where summer heat doesn't just warm you, it presses down on you, heavy and thick, the kind of heat that slows everything down and makes every porch, every gas station, every stretch of two-lane highway feel like it exists slightly outside of ordinary time. In 1999, Dothan had a population of around 60,000 people. Not small enough to be a village, not big enough to be anonymous. The kind of city where people genuinely recognize their neighbors, where kids grew up together from elementary school through high school, and where summer nights meant outdoor parties, long drives through flat countryside, and the comfortable assumption that nothing truly terrible could reach inside the community's edges. That assumption was about to be destroyed. J.B. Beasley was born on July 31, 1982, which means the last night of July 1999 was her 17th birthday. She was the kind of teenager parents describe with quiet pride, an honor student, a cheerleader, someone with plans and ambitions and the discipline to pursue them. Her mother, Cheryl Bergen, spoke about her daughter with a kind of love that has no floor, calling her a beautiful gift. That phrase, years later, would carry a weight Cheryl could never have anticipated when she first said it. Tracy Hollett had been JB's closest friend since middle school. The two of them functioned like a unit, where one went, the other followed. They shared secrets, shared schedules, and shared the easy, unself-conscious closeness that only the deepest friendships produce. On the night of JB's birthday, Tracy was exactly where she was always supposed to be, right beside her. Around 10 o'clock that evening, JB and Tracy climbed into JB's black Mazda 929 and headed north out of Dothan toward Headland, a small town about 10 miles away, where an outdoor birthday celebration was waiting for them. Neither girl made it there. At some point in the darkness, they missed a turn, then another. By the time they realized something was wrong, they weren't heading north toward Headland anymore. They were heading northwest toward Ozark, a town more than 20 miles in the wrong direction from where they needed to be. If you've ever been genuinely lost at night on unfamiliar roads, you know the particular mix of frustration and low-grade anxiety that comes with it. You're not scared, exactly. You're just uncomfortable. You want to be home. You want someone to tell you where to go. JB and Tracy pulled into the parking lot of the Big Little convenience store on East Broad Street in Ozark sometime after 11:30. The store had closed about half an hour earlier, but a woman named Marilyn Merritt happened to be there with her daughter, picking up sodas from outside. The two girls got out of the Mazda and asked for directions. Merritt gave them what they needed, clear and simple instructions for finding their way back to Highway 231, and from there back to Dothan. She would later describe the girls as completely normal. No distress, no strange behavior, just two young women anxious to stop being lost and get back on the road toward home. At the payphone mounted near the front corner of the store, Tracy dialed her mother's number. Carol Roberts answered and heard her daughter's voice come through the line. Tracy explained what had happened, that they'd gotten turned around somewhere along the way but had directions now and were heading back. She kept it short. Before she hung up, she said 3 words that Carol Roberts would carry with her for the rest of her life. "Mom, I love you." Marilyn Merritt stood in the parking lot and watched the black Mazda pull out of the lot and turn right, exactly the direction she described, and roll away into the dark. Nobody saw either girl alive again. The security footage from inside the Big Little store that night was grainy and poorly lit, the way convenience store cameras always are when you actually need them. But even through the blur, investigators would later notice something: a small white pickup truck parked at one of the gas pumps at almost exactly the moment Tracy was on the phone. No purchase was made at that pump. No transaction was recorded. No one recognized the truck or identified its driver. That white pickup would become one of the case's most persistent, irritating mysteries, a ghost image that answered nothing and raised everything. The following morning, August 1st, 1999, neither JB nor Tracy had come home. Families who had gone to bed worried woke up terrified. Missing persons reports were filed. And then, that same morning, someone spotted JB's black Mazda sitting on Herring Avenue in Ozark, less than a mile from the payphone Tracy had used the night before. Police were called. Officers approached the vehicle expecting perhaps to find two sleeping teenagers who'd pulled over after getting tired, or maybe a breakdown situation, something explainable. The exterior of the car gave almost nothing away. No collision damage, no broken glass, no signs that it had been forced anywhere. But the details accumulated quickly once investigators looked closer. Mud coating the exterior. A gas tank scraped nearly empty. The driver's window cracked open a few inches. Doors unlocked. JB's license sitting out on the dashboard in plain view. Both girls' wallets inside, untouched, along with their cash and jewelry. The only thing missing was a keychain. Small, block-lettered, white and black. The words it spelled out, hard to get. 6 hours passed before anyone opened the trunk. It wasn't until early afternoon, while an investigator from Dothan was waiting for a tow truck, that someone discovered the trunk could be released from inside the car without a key. He pulled the lever. J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett were inside. Each had been shot once in the head with a 9mm round. They were fully clothed. There was no obvious sign of struggle. But their bodies told a different story than their appearance. Tracy had a gunshot wound at her temple. There were scratches on her arm and plant material on her clothing. Her brand new sneakers, purchased just the week before, were thick with mud. Both girls had wet pant legs, soaked up to the knees. They had been somewhere else before this, somewhere with wet ground and thick brush, somewhere that was never the parking lot on Herring Avenue. The car was a dumping site. The murders had happened somewhere else. A single 9mm shell casing rested on Tracy's leg. Robbery was eliminated immediately. Nothing of monetary value had been taken. That ruled out the most common motive and pointed investigators towards something darker. The initial autopsy found no evidence of sexual assault and no substances in the girls' systems. But more than 2 months after the murders, the Alabama State Crime Lab released findings that fundamentally altered the direction of the investigation. Semen was recovered from J.B. Beasley's clothing and skin. An unidentified palm print had been lifted from the interior of the trunk lid. District Attorney David Emery stated publicly that this crime was sexual in nature, that the assault and the killings were connected, and that whoever owned that DNA profile was the man who had killed both girls. He was right on every count. The only problem was that the DNA matched no one. Not in the Alabama criminal database, not in any database. The profile sat in the system like a key without a lock. Perfectly preserved, perfectly useless for year after year after year. 1 month after the bodies were found, a man named Johnny William Barentine walked voluntarily into a police station and began talking. He was 28 years old, lived near Herring Avenue, and claimed he had been present when the murders took place. Over the next 4 hours, he told investigators 6 completely different versions of what he'd supposedly witnessed, each one contradicting the last, each one assembling a slightly different story about a tattooed stranger who had flagged him down, climbed into the girl's car, and done the shooting while Barentine watched helplessly. Police arrested him. The community exhaled. The press ran with the story. People wanted this to be over. It wasn't over. The neighbor Barentine, named as his accomplice, had a verified alibi. Neither Barentine's DNA nor the neighbor's matched the semen sample, and critically, in all 6 versions of his story, Barentine had never once mentioned a sexual component to the crime. When confronted with that gap in a story supposedly told by an eyewitness to everything that happened that night, it collapsed entirely. Barentine eventually admitted to a grand jury that he had fabricated everything, motivated by the reward money. He was released. The grand jury declined to indict him. The investigation was worse off than when it started. Months of resources had been spent chasing a fiction. Other leads followed. A man from Michigan with missing hours on the night in question. A man from Mississippi who left town immediately after the murders. Investigators traveled. They questioned, they tested. Nothing matched. Every suspect they cleared created one more gap in a case that was already full of them. The white truck in the parking lot footage was never identified. The years moved forward. The 2000s arrived and kept going. Children who were in elementary school when JB and Tracy were killed grew up and graduated high school without the case ever being solved. The file stayed open at the Ozark Police Department in the way that old cold cases stay open, officially, technically, but without any real momentum. Investigators came and went. Leads dried up. The semen DNA sat preserved in the lab, biologically stable, informationally silent. For Carol Roberts and Cheryl Bergen, no amount of time passing meant any distance from what had happened. The date July 31st didn't become easier with repetition. It became harder, because each year added another layer to the specific weight of knowing that the man who killed their daughters was walking around somewhere under the same sky completely free. He was getting older, probably just like them, living some kind of life, perhaps sleeping well at night. The case appeared in anniversary pieces every 5 years. Online cold case communities discussed it. People in Dothan who remembered the summer of 1999 would bring it up sometimes, particularly in July, when the heat returned and the air felt the same way it had felt that night. But discussion wasn't the same as answers. 20 years passed without a single answer. In April 2018, the arrest of Joseph James D'Angelo in California proved to an entire country that a new tool had arrived, one that could do what fingerprints and traditional DNA databases could not. Genetic genealogy worked differently from any investigative technique that had come before it. Instead of searching databases of convicted criminals, analysts uploaded crime scene DNA into public ancestry databases where millions of ordinary people had voluntarily submitted their own genetic profiles to trace family histories and connect with distant relatives. The technique didn't search for a killer. It searched for a killer's cousins, second cousins, distant relatives, anyone who shared enough genetic material to establish a family tree. From there, genealogists worked methodically through branches and generations, cross-referencing with public records, narrowing down the possibilities until a single individual emerged who matched all the known parameters. It was detective work applied to biology, and it could find people who had never committed a crime in their lives because their relatives had, and because family DNA tells a story whether you want it to or not. Ozark Police Chief Mosley Walker had followed the D'Angelo case with something beyond professional curiosity. He had been thinking about a specific evidence bag in his own building. He contacted Parabon Nanolabs, the company whose analysis had been instrumental in identifying the Golden State Killer, and asked them to run the 1999 semen sample through GED Match. The results came back pointing at a cluster of Alabama families. Walker worked through the list, and then he stopped. One name on the list was someone he recognized from his own life, someone he had known since they were both much younger. Coley McCraney was 45 years old in 2019. He had grown up in the Dothan Ozark area. He drove long-haul trucks for a living. He was married to a woman named Jeanette and was raising 2 children. He led worship services as a pastor at a local church. He had no criminal record, no prior arrests, no reason for his DNA to appear anywhere in any law enforcement database. In the community, his reputation was exactly what you would expect from someone with that profile. A familiar face, a decent neighbor, a man of faith. Someone people nodded to on the street without a second thought. Chief Walker understood that approaching McCraney as a suspect would likely end badly. A man with that much to lose, confronted directly, might refuse to cooperate, might call an attorney, might disappear. Instead, Walker invited him to the station under a different framing. A local resident helping to identify whoever the actual suspect might be. A conversation between 2 men from the same community. McCraney arrived with his wife. Jeanette sat beside him and encouraged him to provide whatever the police needed. She had no idea what was coming. She trusted her husband completely. McCraney agreed to give a DNA sample. An officer swabbed the inside of his cheek. McCraney walked out of the building, calm and cooperative, not knowing that Parabon's genealogical analysis had already placed him at the center of the family tree before he ever stepped through the door. The results were unambiguous. Coley McCraney's DNA profile matched precisely with the semen sample collected from J.B. Beasley on August 1, 1999. On March 15, 2019, nearly 20 years to the month after J.B. and Tracy pulled away from the Big Little store and into the darkness, McCraney was arrested on multiple counts of capital murder and rape. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. The community did not simply react with relief that a killer had been caught. It reacted with a particular kind of vertigo, The disorienting sensation of realizing that something you believed about your surroundings was entirely wrong. The man who had been sitting in pews, greeting neighbors, going about an ordinary life while two families waited in agony for 20 years was someone people recognized. Someone who had been right there all along. COVID-19 delayed the proceedings. 4 years after the arrest, the trial finally opened in Dale County in April 2023, with McCraney, now 49 years old, seated at the defense table, facing 4 capital murder charges and 1 rape charge. He made the decision to take the stand himself, a move that handed the prosecution direct access to him through cross-examination. His testimony rewrote everything he had previously said. In 2019, he had denied ever knowing either girl. Now, from the witness stand, he claimed he had met JB at a shopping mall in Dothan months before her death. He said they had exchanged numbers, kept in contact, and arranged to meet in Ozark that night. According to his account, his truck had broken down nearby. He spotted the girls at the payphone by chance. They gave him a ride to his vehicle, and he and JB engaged in consensual sex before the girls dropped him off and drove away alive at nearly 1 in the morning. He said he lied to investigators in 2019 only because he feared his wife discovering the affair. The prosecution took this testimony apart with precision. There were no phone records connecting McCraney to JB, no texts, no witnesses who had seen them together at any mall or anywhere else. Marilyn Merritt, the woman who had spoken with the girls at the parking lot, testified that they were clearly just lost teenagers trying to get home, with no indication they were meeting anyone. Tracy's phone call to her mother at 11:35 confirmed the same thing. They weren't heading to a rendezvous, they were heading home. Forensic evidence pointed to a different sequence entirely. The girls had been forced from the road, walked through wet brush at gunpoint. JB was assaulted, and both were shot with a 9mm handgun before being locked in the trunk of their own car and driven to Herring Avenue. But the witness that landed most heavily in the courtroom wasn't a forensic expert or a law enforcement officer. It was Jeanette McCraney, the woman who had sat beside her husband in 2019 and quietly encouraged him to cooperate with police, who had unknowingly handed investigators the tool they needed to confirm what they already knew. Jeanette testified that her husband had left home on the night of July 31, 1999, and had returned at a time and under circumstances that he never adequately explained. The silence in the courtroom when she said those words was the kind that settles differently than ordinary quiet. On April 26, 2023, the jury returned its decision after a single day of deliberation. Guilty on all 4 counts. The following day, the sentence was handed down, life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the gallery, Carol Roberts sat motionless for several minutes after the verdict was read aloud. She later said that she was stunned, that she had waited 24 years to hear someone finally be held accountable, and that the word had reached her like something she had almost forgotten how to receive. Cheryl Bergen, JB's mother, leaned forward in her seat and wept without restraint. Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall, who had personally prosecuted the case, stood before cameras and reporters afterward and acknowledged what everyone in that courtroom already understood. No verdict repairs what was broken. No sentence returns what was taken. 2 girls never got to be adults. 2 mothers spent the heart of their lives waiting for a question to be answered. The answer finally came, but it arrived 24 years late, and there is no accounting for the cost of that delay. Coley McCraney is currently incarcerated at the Donaldson Correctional Facility in Bessemer, Alabama. In subsequent interviews, he has continued to maintain his innocence. The case of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett didn't just close a file, it opened a door. Following the McCraney conviction, investigative teams across the country began re-examining cold cases using genetic genealogy in situations where every conventional approach had failed. Families who had spent decades in the particular limbo of an unsolved murder began receiving calls that had seemed impossible. The technology that identified Coley McCraney from a 20-year-old sample has since connected killers to crimes they believed time had buried permanently. The lesson embedded in this case is uncomfortable because it doesn't offer a clean warning about what dangerous people look like or where they come from. Coley McCraney looked exactly like a trusted member of a community because for 20 years, that's what he was. He stood behind a pulpit. He raised children. He drove through the same streets where the families of his victims lived. Dangerous people very rarely announce themselves. That's the whole problem. What this case does offer is something more practical. Tracy called her mother that night. That call is documented, remembered, and part of the official record. But there was a gap. Nobody knew exactly where they were going before they left, and nobody knew exactly what route they had taken. A shared location on a phone, a specific address texted to a parent, a plan to check in at a certain time, any one of those things might have brought help faster. It's not about fear. It's about the small habits that reduce how long someone can be lost before someone who loves them knows where to look. J.B. Beasley should have turned 24 the summer after she was killed. She never did. Tracy Hollett's mother answered a phone call on July 31, 1999, and heard her daughter say, "I love you," and then never heard her voice again. After 24 years, a jury said the name of the man responsible. It wasn't enough. It was also finally something